All right, welcome. So today we're going to be talking with two CCSs from the VA Ann Arbor Residency, and we're going to get to know them a little bit. I'm really excited to have them here. So we'll kind of just start with a little intro, and then we'll talk a little bit about residency and just let conversation go where it goes. Crystal, do you want to go first?
Oh, sure. I guess I should because I'm first. I'm Crystal. A little bit about me. I grew up in a very small town where Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan all meet. Like literally, we lived in Michigan. My dad worked in Indiana, and I was born in Ohio. Reading Michigan, close to places where you have like ride your tractor to school day. There was 50 people in my graduating class. So I made the big jump to undergrad in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is the second largest city in Michigan. So it's pretty good at Grand Valley State University. There I got my psychology degree. And I was all set for that. I'm also like a first generation college student. So I had no idea what I was doing. I was like picking from a list. And then when I got ready to graduate, it was like, well, what can you do with a bachelor's degree in psychology? Which is one of the most frequently searched like Google searches when you put it in, because you can't really do much with a bachelor's degree in psychology. So that led me to what else am I going to do? So I had like 3 years actually in between PT school and undergrad, maybe a little bit more, where I was like, okay, God blessed me with some intelligence. So I guess I'm going to go to med school, but I just couldn't place it. I was like, okay, this doesn't seem right. But I started taking the pre-med classes and doing all of this stuff. Meanwhile, I was like slinging cell phones at a cell phone store, like managing, going like that route. I was like, I'm going to be a salesperson for the rest of my life. This is great. So I did that for a while, and then finally found physical therapy and absolutely fell in love. Just started like observing. I applied to PT school at Grand Valley where I was went to undergrad. I literally had no idea that it was like a competitive thing. I didn't know, like I had no idea what I was getting myself into at all. But it worked out. And honestly, it worked out.
Sure
I'm
did.
so thankful. Which it almost feels good after that journey. You're like, I put all this time in. I had no idea, so I found my place.
But that's a really great background to go into PT, right? Like if anyone could put the best of all worlds together, psychology plus sales plus
Right?
pre-med courses. I mean, that's like a PT in a nutshell right there.
I know. So it all finds its way. So since then I kind of knew I wanted to do cardiopulm. I ended up right after our PT school, I went to the University of Michigan and was on the cardiovascular acute care team for 2 years there. And then I really decided that I liked cardiopulm and I wanted to do more. So I did the VA residency in Ann Arbor. And then I ended up staying in Ann Arbor. I joined an amazing residency faculty. I work cross settings, ICU, the acute care, the subacute rehab they have, outpatient, cardiac rehab, all of that. So living the dream.
I know it. I know the whole picture, and it's a fun picture. We'll get more into the residency specifically in a bit. How many years out were you, Crystal, before you went into residency?
2 years.
2 years.
And I would say it was very focused too in cardiopulm.
Yes.
Which is the other thing that was interesting because it was, that was our team, and it's a bigger hospital, the University of Michigan, and I saw cardiopulm patients like nearly 100%. And so actually, when I went to the VA, I was like, what do I do with a total knee patient? So it was an interesting route.
That's fair. Okay, we're going to get into that in a bit. Jessica, give us a little intro about you. Where are you from? Where'd you go to school? How'd you end up at the VA?
Yeah, of course. So I was born and raised in Northern Kentucky. So while Crystal had ride your tractor to school days, everyone thinks that's what I did. That was not my life. Everyone jokes with me in Michigan about that. But anyway, so born and raised in Northern Kentucky. I was fortunate that I realized pretty early on in my undergrad that I wanted to do physical therapy. So I was like fast tracked. That's what I wanted to do. So I went to the University of Cincinnati for physical therapy school. And while I was there, I'd had like the classic, I want to be a sports med PT or outpatient ortho, whatever, like what everybody says. That's what I was thinking going in.
Yep.
Actually, I even had like for my shadowing beforehand was in the hospital, and they took me to the ICU and I almost passed out and it was horrible. And I was like, do not put me in the hospital. I went in like telling for my clinical instructor, not my clinical instructor, but the one that does it at our school, like, don't put me in a hospital rotation. I don't want to do it. So anyway, obviously that changed.
That's a big switch.
I know. So just through like my cardiopulmonary class, I just really fell in love with it. Like I didn't mind reading about it and doing the homework, and I was just finding myself like looking into it a lot more. And so fortunately, again, I was able to tell our SCCE or whatever the title is, like, okay, never mind. Actually, can you put me in the hospital? I want to see what this is about. And so I had a clinical at like an acute care hospital on their cardiopulmonary floor, and was even just further excited and passionate about it. But I still, like, especially through my in-service and everything like that there, I was asking all these questions. I just wanted to know more and like, why, explain, like, and they're like, that's just how it is. Like, that's the rule. We don't see patients at a lab value of this. I'm like, but why? Like, explain that to me. And so through that, just like, was like, okay, I need something more. And we had learned a lot about residency in PT school, all the different ones that existed. And we did not learn about cardiopulmonary very much, but luckily I was set on the right path with that. So applied for the residency, and I went straight into it after graduating. So graduated from UC. Oh, go ahead.
What year was that, Jessica?
2020. So graduated from PT school right when the pandemic hit, like April, and then started the residency July 2020. Was there for a year for that, and then I stayed on. Luckily, they wanted to keep me, had a spot for me. So I'm still at the VA with the residency and doing pulmonary rehab.
Wow, that's a quite the last year of PT school into a residency. I mean, COVID has its own like whole around it, right? And some people didn't get to graduate or walk, and some people lost out on residency or clinicals. So the fact that you started and like were in it, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And also, I'm sure very stressful.
It was, but all like everything kind of felt, I mean, you know, luckily it all worked out. Yeah.
Sometimes it works out like that. And so you're moving, I'm assuming, during said pandy. We'll just call it the pandy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Picked an apartment without even visiting.
Yep.
Just did a Zoom walkthrough. I was like, sure.
Yeah. We didn't even have Zoom. I pretty much picked out my apartment on a phone call with like, you know, half-assed internet, because it was just starting to be like robust. I sound so old, right? Okay, so that's two very different, you know, lean-ins. So riding a tractor to school, I've never done that. That's exciting to me. I'm from New York, right? So like moving to Michigan was like moving to the Midwest. It was a little culture shock in the beginning, but at the end of the day, it was like a good transition for Kansas City. So, you know, we all have our different.
There you go.
all have our things. All right. So let's maybe start with the pros and cons of you want to start with residency, like benefits of residency? Should we do that first? Or you want to do pros and cons of new grad versus seasoned?
Benefits,
let's do benefits. So residency is like a big question, right? Should you do a residency? Is it worth it? Which one do I do? So first of all, let's just talk about like, why did you choose to do a residency? That might be a good way to lead us into benefits of that. So whoever wants to jump in first, bring it. Why residency?
I can go. So so for me, what drew me to residency, of course, is the mentorship. I feel like that's one of the highest selling points. And actually, so when I was talking about my story, like before I even nailed down exactly what setting, I was already thinking about residency before I even knew like what setting, because of the mentorship and having that like focused time with somebody. And I also just like the opportunities that come with it. So for me, what I always say is residency was 100% worth it for me because I achieved my 5-year plan in a year and a half. So I was able to, really dive into an area that I loved, become specialty level. I was exposed to teaching opportunities and mentored on how to teach and lecture. Did a little bit with research, presented at conferences. So like, it just really helped me fast track all of that. And, all of those things is where I was drawn to.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. What about you, Crystal? You were already out. You were already in it.
Yeah. And I didn't know. We didn't talk about residency a lot in PT school. And, I
know. It wasn't a thing.
It wasn't a thing. And
No.
what was interesting is our cardiopulm professor had just like mentioned it on a whim because one of his past students that went to Grand Valley, she had done the VA Ann Arbor Residency. And I just remember that just like briefly. It was like literally just said it during class one day. And so first of all, I'll just say that just like I didn't know if I wanted to be a PT school and I just ended up there at the end of PT school, I was like, what do I want to do? And I was like, yeah, pediatrics seems amazing. Maybe I'll get a job there. Maybe I'll go to neuro. Maybe I'll do this. I did know I didn't want to do outpatient ortho. That was like one thing I knew I didn't want to do.
Very rare.
Yeah. And my friend's like, hey, you like acute care. I was like, I do not. Like, I want rehab. That's for some reason I just didn't want to do. I was like, I don't like acute care. She's like, yes, you do. You loved it. And I was like, oh gosh. And I do love the medical aspect. All of this starts coming, and I'm like, you know what? She's right. And then during PT school, I had like amazing cardiopulm professor, and I'll do a little shout out to Dr. Michael Shoemaker, who is like one of the leaders in cardiopulm and just like a really, really great mentor. And during that time, I was a crazy PT student who I like literally went to him, and I feel so bad. And I sat down because I'm one of these people that I love to do research and stuff. And in PT school, you don't have time for that. My dad was diagnosed with COPD after he had like a major MI, emergent cabbage surgery, was in the ICU for 11 days, all this stuff. We had a lot of like family, like tragedy and stuff. And then my dad calls me and he's like, I have COPD. I looked it up on the internet. I'm going to die. And I'm like, wait, what? And I was like, we just went through all of this stuff. Like, you can't die now. And
oh my goodness.
PT school, so I don't even really know like what COPD is. And I'm like, they're like, you should go talk to Mike. And I like didn't really know him then. And I was like, okay, this is my professor. Yep. And then I'm in the computer lab, and it's like all these like peer-reviewed articles by Michael Shoemaker about COPD. And so I sat in his office and I said, so I just like want to know a little bit more about COPD and like, I said a little thing, and then basically I asked him if my dad was going to die.
I was going to say, how long
does he have to live? Just tell me.
I was going to say, how long into the conversation did that sentence come out?
It wasn't too long.
You didn't lead with it, though.
I didn't lead with it. And so, we actually just had like a great time looking at like his health and his cardiopulm history, and then my mom's, and like I like basically like talked to cardiologists and fought with doctors and all of these things, basically with his mentorship behind me and doing that. And I was like, oh gosh, this is so cool.
Yeah, you learned about advocating really
yes, I did.
Close knit there.
Exactly. And so so then when I went to look for jobs, someone told me, go to the University of Michigan. You're never going to get any better mentorship when it comes to acute care, because they have everything there, and they have a very structured mentorship program. And I was like, well, why not? It's not too far away. It's all, I was 3 hours away from my family, so I was 2 hours, so it's closer. So when I applied, it was med surg and cardiovascular team, and I'm like, oh no, what do I do? And I was like, my heart's being pulled. So I ended up there. And so I ended up there, and kind of like Jessica, like I just had all of these questions. And the University of Michigan has great mentorship. We have great like clinical specialists, and we talk through a lot of stuff. And like there, more than anywhere else, you really do get to talk about some of that stuff. You get to delve in. But still, I still had questions, and I'm like at home, like, you know, taking my time, and just, I was spending so much time looking up stuff about cardiopulm and for my patients. And I actually kind of struggled a little bit my first year, and I was like, I would just be like, well, my patient should be with, you know, Rachel, because Rachel has more experience than me, and they're going to get better physical therapy, and they're not going to get the best outcomes with me. And I hated that feeling, and I couldn't. And they're like, you know, you have to learn, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, but like, I don't feel good about it. And I think that's what made me go to residency, is that I wanted to learn more, and I wanted to do the very best that I could for my patient. But one, I didn't have time to like look at all these things. And two, there's only so much that you can look at and teach yourself. Like you need that mentorship, or you need the experience, you know, or both. Yeah. And that's what ended up happening in a residency. And that's probably the number one benefit, is that basically I kind of, like she said, like skip through years of experience in a way, because I'm living through my mentor's experience.
Absolutely.
And I had really great mentors, you know, at the VA in Ann Arbor, and they've done all these different kinds of things. And I'm like, oh, well, I'm learning about these pulmonary interventions for the person who wrote that section of the textbook. And I was like, what?
Right.
That's crazy. I just don't think that, and I think I will stand behind this, and I'm curious to what you guys think, but at least in cardiopulm physical therapy, I don't think without residency that I would have gotten where I am when it comes to clinical care for my patients.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the two things I keep, or the one thing I keep hearing in regards to like why do a residency, is that you wanted more. Like there's this like innate drive to understand it better, or like get the why behind any of the things, whether it's a lab value or a surgical procedure or a breathing technique, but also the mentorship. And that was like a really big piece of it. And so I actually went into mentorship a little bit today, just like in what does it mean? And like, what does mentorship mean? Because I think people always want that, but what does it mean? What are you looking for when you're looking for a good mentor or mentorship or any of that?
Yeah, I think for me, it's like bringing out. It's not being too judgmental, right? It's having somebody see who you are, as a person, see who you are as a physical therapist, and say, you know, have you thought about this? Bring me in different perspectives and paths that I've never thought about, and then helping me come up, you know, kind of elevate and try to, and it's so much different than I think, you know, having an instructor and, you know, learning in those kinds of ways. It's really like, it's almost like a partnership, but where they're just really like helping you level up so much in all the different ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I completely agree. Like helping you level up, I think that's a good way of putting it. Identifying in you, you know, like what kind, like what do you need? How can you challenge the person, but also support? So like a mentor is someone who can find that way to challenge you and support you through that, and not necessarily like hold your hand and take you to where you need to go, but show you like what might the path be, or what, give you some tools to maybe figure it out. That's where I see a good mentor.
I 100% agree. I think it's a little bit of being a good coach and being able to meet your person where they're at, and also learn their personalities and like know how to push them, because everyone's a little bit different and going to respond to you a little bit differently. But sometimes there's a little bit of the handhold, and sometimes there's a little bit of the show you, and then there's that challenging point, right? And can you find that nice little balance? But I'll go back to Crystal's comment about, you know, could you really do cardiopulm without a residency? I think there is possibility, but I think residency is just an all around like full picture of what you need to get to the next level. And to go to Jessica's point, I think one of the big things I hear from people who haven't done residencies or who are against residency is typically time, right? Can you really, I don't want to say create, but can you really develop a specialist in 1 year? And I think Jessica hit the nail on the head with that one. Yes, time and experience, I think, plays such a huge role in who you are as a therapist and your knowledge base and your wisdom and your ability to like foresee things. But a residency is like this curated experience that allows you to achieve all of these different things within 1 year that may have taken you 5 or 10 years to do on your own, whether that's teaching in a DPT program or presenting at state or national level, whether it's being in multiple settings in like 1 year's time, and actually having someone that you can bounce ideas off of and like truly be mentored, which I think is what people are always like looking for and sometimes get disappointed by, like in regular practice, where you kind of get, you're going to be mentored, you're going to be taken care, and then all of a sudden you're kind of like, you know, sink or swim, kid, like, you know, figure it out. And I think residency gives you that opportunity to actually be like taken under someone's wing and let you level up or bring the best out of you. So I mean, I 100% agree. Let's talk about the differences in the new grad versus a seasoned therapist or someone a few years out. So we have like 3 different experiences here. Jessica was new grad via COVID, which I think is a whole next level.
Yeah.
Crystal's 2 years out, and I was 4 years into my career before going into residency. And my partner was a new grad. So let's do some pros and cons. Jessica, you want to go first with this one? Give me some pros of the new grad coming into residency.
Yeah, sure. So I think for me, I was already in that mindset of studying and, you know, what are my time management skills? Like I knew that about myself of like what I needed to do to study, how I needed to prepare for things. That was just like in the forefront because I just passed the board exam and I just did PT school. So, and I was used to like grinding and putting in a lot of hours towards didactic material. Obviously it's very different because I wasn't completely working full time. And then with residency, you have to work too, but you know, I was still in that mindset. So that was one of the biggest for me.
Okay.
Also, I'll give a second one. Is I hear a lot of people say too, they don't want to do residency because of like the pay cut. Well, for me, it wasn't a pay cut because I hadn't been paid. Like I was doing full-time clinicals. So that was a pay raise.
I totally agree. I put that in my like pros list of like reasons why to do residency as a new grad. It's like, well, you haven't been paid yet. So it's the first time you're getting a paycheck. You're not going to feel the cut. You're like, yes, I'm in a plus of some kind.
Yeah, this is
versus
awesome.
You're like, wow, that's not what I'm used to seeing at the ends of the week. And you're like, oh. Okay, Crystal, give me some pros of being seasoned and doing a residency.
Pros. I think definitely I will compare it to the first year out. I think you're really learning how to be a physical therapist. Yes, you learned in PT school, but when you're your first year out, that's like, oh, you know, you're just learning who you are as a physical therapist. And so I am very, very grateful that I did it the way that I did. There are some cons, which we could talk about, but I'm grateful that I did it this way. And the reason is because I knew who I was for the most part. I wouldn't call myself a seasoned PT or anything. I still very much felt like a new grad. I was 2 years out, but I didn't have that learning curve of, okay, my 12 months of residency is focused on cardiopulm and kind of this like specialty area, and it's not none of it's really going towards being a new PT, somewhat, but not the same. And so in that way, I also knew what I wanted out of it. And so like I wanted to go for the mentorship and to do what's best for my patients, but I also knew I wanted to do research. I wanted to do teaching. I wanted to like have kind of some leadership experience. So I felt like I was able to tailor the residency somewhat to what I was interested in. And so like, no, I don't want to pass up on a research opportunity, or I don't want to pass like I want to do something bigger, and this is the experience that I have and this is what I want to do. And so a good residency, I would say, will meet you where you're at.
I
And
love that.
I if I would have did it right out of PT school, I would have been, like here. But because I waited 2 years and I had some experience under my
Mhm.
belt, and part of it is I did have some good cardiopulmonary experience from some good mentors at U of M, and I'm like here when I get out, which is
Right.
that worked out. It worked out for me.
Right. Absolutely. I agree with that piece about maybe even not being seasoned, but being not a new grad. Was you already know who you are as a PT. That's usually the con that I say for the new grad doing residency, because you really are. You're learning who you are as a PT, your bedside manner, your ability to advocate, just the speaking up to the physician or the nurse or whoever is on your interdisciplinary team. And sometimes it's even like the transfer techniques or whatever, right? So
Yeah.
there's like a little bit of that, but I have seen it work, right? So my residency partner was a new grad, and she had a little bit of that learning curve piece, but she also met right up, and she was better at the didactic and the structured versus me, who had been out of school for like 4.5 years. I was a clinical specialist where I was. You start to like have to take a different, approach. So let's switch into cons, since I kind of teed that one up. Jessica, since you were a new grad, any cons that you felt as a new grad?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had to. I had a. I guess I already said grind, but I had to grind that first. I mean, for throughout the whole year, but even especially
Yes.
that first like 3 months of like, I felt good going into the residency because I felt I was entry level in acute care. But that was based on 10 weeks of a clinical, right? So that's a whole new thing when you get there. So the first 3 months, especially, like I was still figuring out the basics of being a PT while also trying to take it next level. So like trying to balance both. And I always like my other mentor always brings up that I mentioned that I felt like I was being waterboarded a little bit in the beginning because I was just trying to absorb what it is to be a PT.
You're just taking it all.
The VA system and
Yep.
then residency on top of it. And so, yeah, I really had to like,
That's a lot. I mean, it's a lot. It's a
Yeah.
new job on top of residency, on top of like, there's so many facets to it, which is why I like talking about this, because I think not everyone realizes these things. And so like this wasn't available when I was coming in. Right. So I think it's so important for people to know what they're getting themselves into. Like, Jessica, I think you had a really good idea of what you were setting yourself up for. And you're like, let's go.
Yeah.
Even
I was
if
gonna say, it takes, I think, I mean, we'll probably get to this, but it takes, you have to really know yourself and know what you're ready for. And so because I was fortunate enough to know, like early in undergrad, I wanted to do PT. And then even though it took me a little bit in PT school to know I wanted cardiopulmonary, like I still had my sights set, and I'm an organized and a list person. So like I knew kind of like my steps. So I had that part together. And then I just had to make sure I had my like stress coping management strategies in place as well, to be able to handle that.
You also just came out of that too, right? Like you had clinicals, you had your board exam, you had multiple, like you were already juggling. And so now you're just juggling different things. So I think it's just like that steady state.
Yeah.
All right, let's do some cons of the treating therapist, the seasoned therapist.
The 2 years out trying to start her life therapist who just bought a house and had some other commitments. I just another thing about me is we have a physical therapy association, the APTA, and all the chapters. I love serving on those. At that point, I was on the APTA Michigan Board of Directors. We had just bought a house. We're getting used to life. And I'm like, okay, like, can I take this huge pay cut, honey, and never be home because I'm going to be living at the hospital, and sometimes I'm going to cry, and sometimes I'm going to be, and so you have like, you already have a set life, and it's like, you kind of, it was only 2 years, but we had our routine, and it's like, wait, what do you mean you're going to spend your Saturday and Sunday, studying or doing this presentation or whatever? And it's like, well, what I'm gonna do. That's something, thinking about your relationships and your
Yes.
family and all of those types of things because it definitely impacts them. Definitely the financial, and then the little bit of even though you're still, I'm only 2 years, so I would say I'm like, pretty humble person, but you already you have your own techniques and the way that you do things, and someone's like standing there and like watching you, and it's like, wait, I know this is like fine, but like, is it fine? Or like, what are they thinking? And I know that Jessica had definitely plenty of that, but there's almost like a sense of like, well, I've been doing this for 2 years, and what do you mean? And there's a little bit of a struggle there. You really have to like open yourself up, which
You
is
have
hard
to.
because I spent 2 years of building myself up to say, "You're good enough. You're good enough. You're a PT. You graduated. You have this experience. You can do these things, and you're good enough for your patients." And now I'm like opening myself up to say, like, in a way, like there's so much more I can learn,
Yes.
and it
Mhm.
kind of sucks. It
Yes.
kind of feels sucky.
I mean, honesty is the best policy here, kids.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to agree with that. And I think just like you both said, you know what you're signing yourself up for, and like I'm asking for it
Yeah.
because I didn't have it in my first job. My first job was sink or swim. Like you got thrown in, sink or swim, like figure it out. And I did. And so I was like a go-to person on my unit. So I was literally going from being a go-to person to a student, right? And so you have
Yeah.
to take all of your pride and just, I don't want to say take it, but like be open to the feedback because the
Mhm.
feedback makes you better.
Mhm.
Don't take offense. Like you have to let your whole, that's what I want to say. You have to let your whole guard down because that's why you're there. You're there to be critiqued, positive feedback, hopefully, really that like build you up and pull it out of you type stuff. And if you put the guard up, it makes it so much harder to get to that next piece.
Mhm.
But I do have to say the financial part was a little bit hard. I also moved. So I moved from New York to Michigan. I had just gotten a promotion because I just got my GCS
Uh.
and I took a $40,000 pay cut. And then my now wife came a month and a half in and was also looking for a job. So we're living on one residency salary for
Oh,
a
wow.
hot minute. Bad financial decisions. Like in
Mhm.
retrospect, I would have done things differently. But it's something to consider, right? Like what's the cost of a move? What's the cost of an apartment? What is your, relationship situation? And shout out to the significant others in this whole category because they have to be special people too. And I do not want to discount that. Like my wife is a freaking saint. And she talks about like when she was residency wife versus faculty wife and the similarities and the differences there. So shout out to the significant others. Like, you have to this is a big decision. It's a big life
Mhm.
change.
Yeah,
All right.
it
So we
is.
got pros, we got cons. I think we hit both pretty much. Anything else you can think of like pros and cons, like as you're listening around the edges? Okay. I think those
I
are
think we got the big ones for sure.
I think so too. All right. Let's talk about that year. So what do people need to I mean, like we're getting into it, right? Like this is full transparency. You're going to do this. You need to know what you're getting yourself into and what you're signing
Mhm.
yourself up for, because if you don't, you're setting yourself up for failure. And I think that is like the hardest truth. And I was usually very upfront with people who were applying. I mean, you can say certain things, you can't say certain things, but like I'm going to say this, so neither of you have to say this. If you have the opportunity or have the ability, don't plan for big life events the year you're going to do a residency. Like that is my big advice. Like don't plan on getting married, don't plan on a honeymoon, don't plan on purchasing a house. Don't plan for something big and then choose to do a residency. Obviously, like life happens.
Sure.
The stuff you can't plan for, like everyone's going to be able to help you and adapt. But like if you're really doing this, my advice, and I'm speaking for myself, don't have a big life plan because it is going to be quite the process. Like I can just think of what planning a wedding looked like and like all of that stuff, buying a house, like that whole piece, and doing a residency. No, ma'am.
Mm-mm.
I mean, could it be done? Yeah, sure. Of course, anything could be done, but I would say it's not recommended.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't feel like anyone ever says this, but maybe the only pro of the pandemic happening at that time is I wasn't doing anything else. Life was shut down, so I was just going to residency and able to focus
Hell
on
yes.
that. Maybe that's the only way to say glass half full on that. But
Yeah, check for that, Pandy.
because,
What else I got to do?
I was able to just focus. I didn't have anywhere else to go. Couldn't even go to a restaurant for a while there.
That is the hard truth. All right, so
Yep.
let's talk about what that year looks like now that I got the big like piece out the way. What does that year look like? What do people have to expect going into a residency?
Oh, I'm not the best representation, but I'll be the representation of don't plan and all the things will happen. So I'll tell you that it's doable even if horrible things happen during residency. So I was in residency so I started at the end of July. In October, my mother-in-law suddenly passed away and my mom got diagnosed with cancer
Oh my
in the
God.
same week within days of each other. And she had to go through surgery and radiation and all of these things. My family moved into my house. So thank God I bought that house before residency.
There's a glass full there.
Yeah, and so that was kind of going on in the background. And in some ways, if you've been to kind of rock bottom, you almost know that some of the things that you do that you actually still do are almost a break away from that. So it ended up being okay. But it was a struggle. And I'll tell you that I was 2 years out. I'm not the most organized person to begin with. I like to do things last minute. That's how my brain works. It's like, oh yeah, it's all right there. It's all coming together. I have to marinate, and then I bring it together, and that's
Sure.
I know that's how I am.
Yep.
And so that was hard, and I had to change who I was. And I had to recognize, okay, this is where you're at. You have to do that organization. You have to use this structure. I will say one of the best things that came out of it, that I'll say, before all the stuff happened with my family and before residency, I I'm what they call a perfectionist. And I never knew why they called me a perfectionist, because I understand that things aren't perfect, and I'm not trying to get perfect, but I'm trying to get perfect for me, which is definitely doable. Because if
I
I
like
study
that.
and I prepare enough, and then this is perfect enough for me. And so I had my own standards of like perfection, and I was getting them. I honestly was. I was like, oh yeah, I'm getting residency. I'm doing this in PT school. I'm doing this in whatever. And I couldn't do that in residency. And I think even maybe without my family things, I would have got there too. But it was like I couldn't prepare 100% with everything. And I
Absolutely.
couldn't, and I had to be okay with it.
Yep.
And again, another awful feeling where I'm just like, "Oh my gosh, I'm not prepared for this," but I had to do it anyways. If I usually in practicals in school, like I prepare, 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 and now I'm like a live practical in residency, and I'm like, "I hope I learned something," and it comes through, you know? And
Absolutely.
it works out, and I'm so thankful because now I can say like, okay, I didn't 100% prepare and put all of that time, but I can go and do a patient education class, and I can go and talk to my peer or other PTs on cardiopulmonary physical therapy, and I could do a podcast like this, and I can do all of these things and not be 100% like prepared, but still be okay, and I
Yep.
will survive. And the work that I put in, like it still shows through.
It
And I
does.
just wasn't sure. I always thought that I had to like prepare, 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 prepare. So I think that was a good thing. But it was hard. There were a lot of
That's a lot,
a lot of
Crystal.
yeah, it was a lot.
That's
Yeah.
a big life event that you cannot prepare for during a
Mhm.
massive, like,
Mhm.
commitment.
Yeah. And
I
I will say the residency, everybody helped, they helped, change things around and do things for me. And I think, every good residency does. You have certain
Mhm.
requirements that you have to meet. I had to, also, my mom's from the Philippines. I had to be there. It ended up being an oral cancer, which she didn't smoke or drink or anything, but she couldn't communicate. So she had a trach, she had all of this stuff. So I had to be there for her. So they ended up extending the residency for me. So I had like, over the course of the 12 months, I had like 30 days off. I extended my residency for 30 days and I was able to get with me. So,
And I think that's super important to make note that they were supportive and there is a way to navigate this if, right? Because you do have to meet
right.
certain requirements, but if in the event that something happened, there are ways to navigate the experience so that you can actually continue with the thing that you started with. But that's a whole different, there's so much learning that happened amidst all the craziness, right? Like even learning how to meet yourself where you're at.
Hmm.
And I think that alone is like how much growth and that you were forced to be put through in that situation.
A lot.
A lot. I
Yeah.
mean, oh man, holy crap, Crystal. That is a year for sure.
Yeah.
That's like that's a whole nother level of emotional burden on top of, the constraints or things that you're
Right.
doing in your residency.
Mhm.
Jessica, do you want to join in on what does that year look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, I can kind of just paint a picture of kind of the more basics about the structure, I guess.
Mhm,
So it's hard. I mean, it's definitely hard to say what a typical week looks like because, of
mhm,
course, it's going to depend and everything's going to change. But so you are being a PT, you have your caseload. So
mhm,
typically, on the topic of salary, the reason it's a pay cut is you're considered to not have a full caseload. That might look different depending on where you go, but for us, having like a 75% or so a caseload that those are your patients that you're seeing. They hopefully a lot of them are cardiopulm, but as Crystal mentioned too, like you're seeing all these different patients because it's the VA and everybody has everything.
mhm.
But
Sure.
yeah, so you're seeing your patients. For us specifically, we have mentoring time every single day. So that's something that's very different and unique for other residencies. But you meet with your mentor every single day. So you're doing your chart, you come in, you do your chart review, the normal stuff, and then sitting with your mentor to go through your patients, talk through it, go through any like pathophys or, whatever the topic of the week is, whatever we're focusing on. So you have your mentoring time. You might decide to see a patient with your mentor if it's a difficult case or you want to learn a certain technique. Um, in the beginning, you might be doing a lot with your mentor. Towards the end of the residency, you might be more on your own. It just depends
Mhm,
where you're at, of course. But you have your patients, your mentoring time. You have the normal stuff that comes with patient care, talking to doctors, calling patient families, doing equipment, all of that. You're juggling. And then you also have that didactic piece.
mhm,
So we have time set aside for lectures. So you have lectures on, again, whatever the topic is in the curriculum that you're on. You might sit and listen to a lecture. You might have some like articles, things to look up. You might have an activity. Like it just depends on what it is. You might have a case study to submit. So you have your stuff to prepare for the lectures. You have your assignments, so to speak, with like the case studies and whatnot. And so that's a lot to jam all in one day and week. So for me, what that looked like, because taking into account, I was still figuring out how to be a PT. Maybe my hours were officially 7:30 to 4, but I was definitely coming in at 6:45,
mhm,
7 to prep for the day, and then staying until, I mean, shoot, probably in the beginning I was staying till 6:30 because like writing a note took me forever,
mhm.
documenting.
Yes.
And so doing that and then preparing for the next day, I'd go home. I'd probably have to look some things up for my patients for the next day if I knew who they were. Might have to do some of those assignments. I didn't necessarily work on that extra stuff every single day, because I was more like, let's do a little bit, but then save a lot of it for the weekend. And so you still do get to have a life. Like, I want to paint the picture that is hard and there's a lot and it's a big time commitment, but also you're not only a resident, like you're still a person. So my family being in Northern Kentucky, 3 or 4 hours away, like I was still able to go home. I was still able to see my friends and do things. You just have to schedule it out and figure out what works for you on how to manage all of that, because there is the work hours and then the residency stuff on top of that.
And I think that's just a big piece, work-life balance in general, right? Like in the residency, it's a year committed to this thing, but you still have to remember to life at certain points. And that might just be a little bit more strategic, so to speak, right? Like you have to maybe plan the happy hour or plan your workout sessions or plan your trips home versus like you can just kind of go on a whim.
Yeah, for sure.
Anything else for potential residents thinking about a residency, like what that year looks like? And then we'll talk about the VA specifically.
I think for our residents, the most successful are kind of like the ones that think 100% like let their guard down, know that it's a learning experience, kind of know a little bit of what they're getting into. And the other one would I say is like a support system. The people who have a support system, even if it is long distance, which I think Jessica's was, they're the ones that tend to seem to get more growth and more out of the residency as they go through. So just kind of thinking about that, how, and maybe that's again being creative. If your support system isn't with you, we've had a lot of residents bring their significant others with them. But if they're not, like, make sure that you're strategic in going to see your support system or scheduling phone calls or doing these things and not letting yourself just kind of be narrowed into residency, because some of us don't realize how much that impacts us and our ability to learn, is to have that support in the back end.
Absolutely. All right, I have a interview question sort of thing. What do you look for in a resident when they're interviewing, if you're part of that process?
Probably the number one thing I've looked for is it's kind of interesting. So if they're a new grad, a lot of residency candidates seem to be like looking for an extension of their clinical. Like, I'm not confident enough, and I understand. Like I've been there. But like, I'm not confident enough to be a PT, so I want to be under my clinical instructor still. And that's not what residency is. It really isn't. So you can't be stuck there. Like, you have to be okay. And I know it's so hard to, like 10 weeks in entry level, but you do have to have some kind of base level ability, is kind of what I'm looking for, or at least not going in thinking that I'm going to be mentored and I'm going to be handheld.
Right.
That's probably the number one thing that I look for.
Okay. Jessica, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think going off of that too, of just like good self-awareness of like, why are you doing this? What does it mean to you? What do you need from us? Like, all those type of things, and having that like direction. You don't have to have it all figured out by any means. Like I think some of the stuff I've talked about, it might sound like I had like the full A to B plan or ABC plan, and
you did. You had it rocked out.
You did.
I mean, I had an outline. Like, it looks very different. So I don't. Yeah, there were definitely check boxes.
I know there were,
but I might have created them after the fact too, just so I had something to check off. But anyway, so you just kind of like have to have that kind of, what is your passion? Yep. Even if you don't have it 100% figured out, like, what is it that gets you excited, and why are you doing this? Are you just doing it because it's cool to say you did a residency? Like, I don't know, that doesn't sound great. Like, what is it? Yeah, I
think knowing your why is probably one of the most important questions or answers that you should have ready, especially if you're a new grad and if you're a seasoned therapist. Like, either direction, like, why are you doing this? What are you trying to get out of this thing? Is it just the letters? Is it just the accolades? Is it just like, you have to like care deeply about this thing to commit your life for a year to learning? in my
For
opinion.
sure.
I think the why is like front and center.
Yeah, because if you don't care and you're not excited, like it's hard. It's going to be hard. That's a lot of time you got to dedicate to something that you're kind of meh about.
Yeah, you can't be. There is no meh. You can't be meh. Like you're all in. You have to be all in because it lets you sustain like the things that you have to kind of push through. Okay, I had a question. So I was on a residency panel recently, so I'm going to relay a question. And the question was like, what can a new grad do to sort of like stand out in the crowd outside of the why question? Like, what are some things, or even a seasoned therapist, like what are some things that they can do to stand out? Like you have 20 applications coming in. Who's standing out?
So I can say maybe what I think helped me, and then Crystal can correct me if I like it and whatnot. But so I think for me, because I did have only that one acute care clinical, so I had the clinical that helps you. We want you to have some experience there where you did get to dive in and see if you really did like it or do like it. So you have your clinical, but what extra can you add to that? Because only 10 weeks is only 10 weeks or whatever your clinical is. So like those other experiences, those like leadership things, like the kind of like that well-rounded thing that, you know, you need for PT school too. Like what are those other things that make you you and is going to make you a good therapist? And then also, and this is maybe something to relay more in your interview, but like, do you have what it takes to make up for what that experience you don't have? So like, do you have the skill set, the initiative, the drive to really, make up that difference there too?
I like that. What about you, Crystal?
Yeah, I think it's about wanting to do a little bit more. And I think what happens, you know, even if we don't ask for it, because we just went to CSM and we saw all of our past like cardiopulmonary residencies, is you end up being a leader in your specialty area. And so even early on, or as a seasoned PT, we do look for those types of things, like Jessica, if I could share about her, like she had, some experience with like some of the APTA stuff and it's kind of some student leadership stuff. And that kind of tells me like, okay, yeah, you're gonna rise up, because even if you don't ask for it, people are coming to you when it comes to cardiopulm. And we want you to be that representative. We want you to share the knowledge that, that you've learned in residency, because a lot of people, they want it. They really do. And so that, and the communication skills, which, the residency like interviews and stuff have changed over the years and how much, that comes through. But if there's anything that you can kind of highlight within your application or your essays, and of course, like if you get the opportunity to do interviews, those types of things are what we're looking for, is kind of that overall package to be something just a little bit more than just a cardiopulmonary PT.
Okay, I like that. I told them to say yes. Say yes to things. Like if you're presented with an opportunity, say yes. If there's an opportunity to be in the APTA board of something, student conclave, say yes. You have an opportunity to do research with a professor, happens to be in the area that you're interested in, say yes. Like, don't be afraid to do things outside of your comfort zone, and/or that's just different or outside of your curriculum, because I think those things start to make you stand out and stand apart, and also helps you learn to know if you actually want to do that thing.
Yeah.
Right. Like, is it really cardiopulmonary that I like? Nope, sure don't. Like,
exactly. You want to find out before you come to residency.
Yeah.
Hell yes.
And I love that, Rachel. And I will say, and not bragging, but that mentality is what I did in PT school. Is I said yes to everything. I got this like outstanding resident award out of all residencies, not cardiopulmonary residencies,
awesome.
but all residencies in the entire country. I got an outstanding resident award. And that's simply
amazing.
From saying yes, or, so
yes,
from the APTA. And so that's
amazing,
fantastic
Crystal.
advice.
I saw it in your bio. I was like, man, you have two big awards, awesome. Crystal. I'm going to let you go for the second one. Tell me the second one.
Well, the second one, I think, you asked for us to think about our highlights of our careers, and I think this is definitely the highlight of my career. And I'm completely humbled. I never thought in a million years that this would happen, but it's all from starting to say yes. And I got a distinguished alumni award from our DPT program. And last year, I gave a keynote speech, like a motivational
I just got
keynote.
chills. That's
Go
so
ahead
awesome.
at a DPT like graduation. Like how cool is that? Like
That
that's
is awesome.
absolutely amazing. I'm just like glowing from it. I'm humbled. I don't know how it happened, but I guess from saying yes. So take that
Genuinely
advice.
amazing. I love it. I love it,
Yeah.
Crystal. I saw that. I was like, oh my goodness. Like, those are some big accolades. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, let's talk about the VA and we'll kind of start wrapping up. So I loved my VA experience. I actually, to this day, say I earned my GCS and my CCS at the VA. I think the whole experience, the setup, the settings I'm just like, I love that whole experience. So I'm going to let you brag on it and then I'll chime in a little bit. So like, what is different about the VA? What is something that is a huge pro about doing a residency at the VA versus maybe somewhere else?
So I can't necessarily compare to working somewhere else, except for like my clinical experiences, of course. But from what I hear and what I've learned, now that I'm actually living it, is two things come to mind. So like that autonomy piece, which that was what was always the selling point, and I didn't know what that meant until I really started to work here or work at the VA. Of like you really get to work in your license like to the fullest extent. So we if we decide someone needs equipment, we go and get the equipment and we issue it. We don't have to fight with insurance about what it is and why they need it. Like I've already determined they need it, so they get it. And reaching out and asking same thing with like referrals and talking to the doctor. Like the doctors really want to listen to us. They want to hear our opinion and our thoughts on the patient's care. So really getting to do all of that. And then the other thing is just like working with veterans is such a special experience.
It really is.
In a lot of different ways. It's special because they are complex and they have so much going on and everything's going on and coming into play. And then also because they really just are a lot of them are just so thankful and appreciative of what we do. And not that we do this for the thanks, but I always have to remind them that they worked and they sacrificed to get care from the VA, but they're just like so thankful that they get it. And so it's a wonderful experience. I don't want to work with anyone else besides veterans.
That's fair. That's 100% fair. My favorite patients, even in private sector, are my veterans. I'm like, were you a veteran? They're like, yes. I'm like, there's like a feel. There's just like a feel to them.
There's a certain rapport you get to have with them too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally. All right, Chris. So what are some pros of the VA or this specific residency?
Yeah, I love the VA as well, or the veterans. And I think the big thing that we always get, because we have our VA Ann Arbor Residency, and when you think cardiopulm, a lot of people think kind of those advanced life support things. So like LVAD, balloon pump, total artificial heart, ECMO, all of these types of things. And so I did that at U of M. And it was great. Like I love the experience, but it was all about the why behind it. And so it's like, oh, does the VA have complexity like that? It's like we don't have those advanced life support kind of stuff, but we have complex patients to so many different degrees. Cardiopulm, 100%, and all of the things they get exposed to in the military. And then you add some of the psychosocial stuff in, and then you add all the orthopedic stuff in, and then the aging population. I mean, you have so much complexity, and that for a mind like the people that like to go through residency is great because you're always learning and you're always putting the pieces together, and it's I love that. And then the other thing about the VA in Ann Arbor, I don't know if it's like this in all VA residencies, but you get to see the continuum of care, which is so cool. So cool to have a patient that I saw in the ICU like on the vent, not being able to move anything, all the way to like follow them to the floor. Oh, guess what? They need rehab. I get to rehab them. Oh, guess what? They would really benefit from pulmonary rehab. And now they're in pulmonary rehab. And to see that, like one, it's amazing. And when it comes to job satisfaction and what you do for your patient,
Mhm.
two, it gives you clinical insight. It gives
Totally.
you insight, like, okay, you know where they end up, and now this is where they start, and then vice versa. And so it allows you to just be the best at each level to kind of bring that whole picture in. You don't get that anywhere
You
else.
don't.
You don't. And that 100% I think is the best thing about our cardiopulmonary residency at the VA Ann Arbor. You get it. You bring it all together, and then you can take that and you can go wherever you want. And you'll have that awesome like knowledge and clinical base. But
It's true. And if you're thinking about like prepping for the CCS exam, you
Mhm.
need to know across the continuum, right? Like, what does this
Mhm.
person look at ICU level? What does this person look preoperatively? What does this
Mhm.
person look in a subacute setting? And then what do they look like in outpatient outpatient pulmonary rehab?
Mhm.
You have to be able to describe what that person looks like across the continuum and have an expectation of what that care looks like too.
Yep.
I would 100% agree. Plus, it's just so much satisfaction to like
Mhm.
see them pre-op, ICU, post, like the whole, it's just amazing. I think it's
Yeah.
one of my favorite things.
Mhm.
Jessica, do you have anything to add? Because I can throw in a few more on this one.
Yeah, no, I thought of when you were mentioning like the cardiac and pulmonary rehab. Of course, that's another big thing.
Yes.
So with the VA, across the country, like PTs are really involved in cardiac and pulmonary rehab usually. In the
Yep.
community, not so much. It's usually run by nurses, by respiratory therapists, whatever it may be. And so if that's something that you're interested in, like the VA is absolutely the place to be for that. And so for the residency specifically, the residents get 6 months in each. So they are doing cardiac rehab for 6 months and they're doing pulmonary rehab for 6 months. So they're there throughout the whole year of doing those rehab programs. We have the outpatient programs. We have the home-based telehealth programs. So I think I'm pretty proud of our cardiac and pulmonary rehab. I mean, we're tooting our own horns because Crystal and I run that program, but like that
While
is,
you're here, so
Yeah.
toot the horn.
that's true. So yeah, the residency led me there because in PT school, I was just telling Crystal this morning, like in PT school, I was told, don't worry about cardiac and pulmonary rehab. Like there might be one question on the NPTE and then PTs don't do it. So don't worry about it.
And also false.
yeah.
Also
And
false.
now that's what I do full time. So
I loved running outpatient cardiac and pulmonary rehab. And the telehealth program is like near and dear to my heart because it was started right at the base and brought up. And I think that's a whole nother skill that a lot of people might never experience in their career. And it helps you develop in a completely different way.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a whole nother podcast on telehealth because I think that needs to be talked about. I think the skills that you have to be able to communication, right? Going back to your interview question or interview piece, like you have to be able to communicate and communicate well if you're over the phone. Did they finally move to video or is it still?
I do both. I have for pulmonary rehab, I do both.
Okay.
Yeah. Cardiac rehab, I just follow the instructions that you made. So I haven't done BBC because it's just like an extra step, and I'm like, okay.
It was starting to be offered and none of the patients wanted to do it, but it was a little bit
Video.
cumbersome at that
Yeah.
time. So like they had to go to a place to use, I mean, it was a
Oh
lot,
yeah, they don't do that anymore.
But I would be on the phone, like, trying to demonstrate an exercise to like communicate. And I'm like, wow, this is a whole different level.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put a plug in for the VA residency. I think, residencies have exploded across the country in all settings or specialty areas, I should say. And now there are, I believe, 12 active accredited residencies, right? So that just increases the competition for the residency itself, but it gives the person who is applying a lot more range. For me, I loved the whole experience. I think, first of all, working at a VA, working at the top of your scope and learning how to do wound care, prosthetics, and then having the ability to like hit all settings in one day, there is nothing else like it. being able to be like in ICU rounds, treating ICU patients, seeing floor acute care patients, seeing a rehab patient, and then running an outpatient pulmonary or cardiac rehab in the same day, and maybe having a telehealth client.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it's unheard of, the amount of experience that you get from that, even if you don't have the LVAD heart transplant piece, it's going to be okay. Do you still coordinate with U of M? Because I
Yeah.
know.
Yes, we
Perfect.
do.
So
So you do get to see it, and we talk about it, and we
yeah,
lecture on it,
yeah,
and it's something that I have experience with. So I feel, we feel good about it, and then
yeah.
you get to go over to U of M and you get to experience and see it firsthand. So yeah.
And it's the same for pediatrics, right? So
Yeah,
like
pediatrics too. Yeah.
pediatrics is part of the whole picture, and you're probably not gonna treat that patient full time, but you have to know it, understand it, and maybe
Yeah.
observe it, right? And that'll
Mhm.
kind of
Yes.
fill that gap. But
Yeah.
I cannot speak highly enough of the VA residency. I can't speak highly enough of this Ann Arbor VA residency. If you are interested in residency and you're interested in cardiovascular residency, I would 100% look for them. They use the RFPT CAS system now, very similar to PT school, right? But specific
Yep.
to specialty programs. Tell me about application, like when's that due? When do we need to get this in?
Go ahead, Jess.
So I think you're going to put our website in the bio,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
they'll have access to that. There is technically a date on the website coming up, but what we'll say is just get your applications in. We are doing somewhat of a rolling admission. The portal officially closes at some point in June, I believe.
Okay.
So, don't get scared if you look at the date and you're like, oh my gosh, it's so soon. Just
I got scared
reach
of the
out.
date.
I know.
I
Reach
was like,
out
I'm
to
gonna
us.
have to edit this like now. This is going up tonight, ladies.
Yeah, I know. So just reach out if you're interested. Let us know and get those applications in. But yeah, we'll chat with you.
Yep, absolutely. So March 15th is what's on the date, I think. Ignore it, get it in, know your why, push for that interview, and I promise you this residency is gonna give you everything you need to pass that CCS. Really, truly can't speak highly enough. Thank you so much, Jessica, Crystal, for telling your story, for sharing, for being vulnerable, and being fully transparent, because I think that's what we all need to hear when we're making big life decisions like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us. Yeah. I can talk
You're
about
good.
residency all day. So
Oh yeah.
Same. I'm like, let's do it. Let's get that mentorship going. Whatever it is, right? However you need to get it, we're gonna make it happen. All right.
Yep.
Well, want to thank everyone for listening and hanging on for about an hour. Totally appreciate you being here. Have a wonderful evening, and whatever you have to do, get after it.
Thank you.
You are very welcome.